Good evening and welcome to Scotland at 7 on this Wednesday the 19th of March. I'm Douglas MacKenzie, bringing you stories from Scotland and around the world. To discuss the details behind the headlines, I'm glad to be joined again by our guest tonight, Richard Thomson. Many of you will know that Richard was previously leader of Aberdeenshire Council. He was MP for Gordon from 2019 until the constituency was abolished at the last election, and hopes to be a candidate in the Holyrood elections next year. Welcome back, Richard.
Good evening. Great to be back.
We begin the news tonight with a roundup from the Middle East. At least 49,547 Palestinians have been killed and 112,547 in Gaza since the 7th of October 2023, according to the Gaza Health Authority. Israel has launched a fresh wave of airstrikes on the second day of its resumed offensive in the devastated Palestinian territory. The attacks were far less intensive than the massive strikes early on Tuesday morning, which killed more than 400 people and shattered the relative calm since a 19th of January ceasefire paused the 18-month war. 3 people died in an Israeli airstrike on a house in the Sabra suburb in Gaza City, while another 2 were left dead and 6 others wounded in the northern town of Beit Hanun, Gaza health officials said. Mahmoud Basal, a spokesman for Gaza's Civil Defense Agency, put the death toll higher, saying that 13 people had been killed since midnight, including several in the city of Khan Yunis in Gaza's south. There were also reports that an Israeli drone fired at several fishing boats off Gaza City. The IDF issued new evacuation orders on Wednesday, telling residents across a swathe of northern Gaza to move south and west to avoid what they called dangerous combat zones. About 100,000 Palestinians are estimated to be affected by a series of evacuation orders in the last 24 hours, which may suggest the IDF planning ground operations. The Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said late on Tuesday that the strikes were only the beginning and that future negotiations with Hamas will take place on fire. Israel and Hamas accuse each other of breaching the truce, which had broadly held since January and offered respite for the 2.3 million inhabitants of Gaza. UNICEF Executive Director Catherine Russell said that the reports and images emerging from the Gaza Strip following today's attacks are beyond horrifying. Hundreds of people have reportedly been killed, including more than 130 children, representing the largest single-day child death toll in the last year. The latest attacks come as life-saving aid remains blocked from entering Gaza, compounding the risks to children. It has been 16 days since the last truck delivering humanitarian aid crossed into Gaza. In addition, electricity has been cut to the main desalination plant, significantly reducing the amount of potable water. She said, "Today, Gaza's 1 million children who have endured more than 15 months of war have been plunged back into a world of fear and death. The attacks and the violence must stop now." Adding, "We urge all parties to immediately reinstate the ceasefire, and we call on countries with influence to use their leverage to ensure the situation does not further deteriorate. International humanitarian law must be respected by all parties, allowing the immediate provision of humanitarian aid, the protection of civilians, and the release of all hostages." Well, Richard, the spokesman there calling for countries with influence to speak out. I don't know if the United Kingdom is a country with influence, but it's been a very muddled, has it not, with David Lammy being publicly contradicted by Keir Starmer in what he was saying about potential genocide. What's your take on the UK's position?
Well, it's just yet another evening of the grimmest possible headlines from Gaza and the Middle East, and I don't think the UK is without influence. Certainly, I think that one of the reasons the Israeli government puts so much effort into making politicians afraid of speaking out and becoming subject to criticism is precisely because they worry to at least some extent about how they are viewed in the rest of the world, as difficult as that might be to believe at times. But there's certainly one country in the world with enormous influence over the Israeli government, and that's the government of the United States. And at some point, sooner rather than later, I really do hope that the message is conveyed that enough is enough, and that this senseless bloodshed, the indiscriminate killing of civilians, cannot go on. If she said in the introduction, that's 50,000 civilians dead, none of whom will have had anything whatsoever to do with Hamas. And how do you ever hope to get Gaza out from underneath Hamas if you don't allow people to live and exist properly and build up a civil society of their own? This is not the answer. And the war crimes being perpetuated by the Israeli government in terms of shutting off electricity, cutting off aid again, and then, dropping the bombs that they are, potentially, as you said, preparing for a ground offensive, it just gets no better. And people need to be calling this what it is. It's a series of war crimes. And there's only one person who can bring Netanyahu to heel, I think, and that is Donald Trump. And sadly, I hae my doubts that he will attempt to do any such thing.
Indeed, it would appear that way. Let's move on now to our daily update from Ukraine on this day 1120 since the Russian full-scale invasion of the country. The Kremlin said after Trump and Putin's call that the Russian president had given immediate orders for strikes to stop. Soon after the call, air raid sirens wailed and explosions out in Ukraine. President Zelensky said he would support stopping strikes on energy targets, but was waiting for further information from Washington. Ukraine last week offered a full 30-day ceasefire, which Putin has rejected. Zelensky said they are not ready to end this war, and we can see that. They are not even ready for the first step, which is a ceasefire. Zelensky said there have been hits, specifically on civilian infrastructure. Local reports said the city of Slovyansk was partly blacked out after power infrastructure was damaged. Zelensky said more than 40 Russian drones were launched from Russia. A hospital in Sumy was bombed in a wave of attacks on Ukraine that led Volodymyr Zelensky to declare Vladimir Putin had, quote, effectively rejected a ceasefire, immediately after the Russian president told Donald Trump he would halt strikes against Ukraine's energy grid and infrastructure. Ukraine's troops attacked along the border with Russia's Belgorod region on Tuesday, just southeast of the remaining positions in Kursk. The Institute for the Study of War said that, according to Russian bloggers, Ukrainian forces moved from Sumy Oblast to reach southwest of Demidovka in Belgorod before they were pushed back. Ukraine carried out up to 5 attacks on Tuesday using up to 200 fighters with tanks, armoured combat vehicles and demolition vehicles, the Russian Defense Ministry said. Kyiv did not comment. Authorities in the southern Russian region of Krasnodar said early today that a Ukrainian drone attack set fire to an oil complex near the village of Kavkazskaya. Russia's aviation watchdog Rosaviatsia said it was suspending flights from airports at Kazan, Nizhny Novgorod and Nizhnekamsk, all hundreds of kilometers east of Moscow. Zelensky on Tuesday said Ukrainian troops were still fighting in Russia's Kursk region and would stay there as long as we need. Olaf Scholz, the outgoing German Chancellor, said at a news conference in Berlin with the French President Emmanuel Macron that ending Russian attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure would be a good start and first step, but there cannot be an agreement without Ukraine. The next step must be a complete ceasefire for Ukraine, and as quickly as possible, Macron said. We have been promoting peace since day one, and that cannot be achieved without Ukraine taking part in talks. Germany's parliament voted in favour of unleashing historic levels of spending to boost its military against Russian aggression. The incoming Chancellor Friedrich Merz and his party joined with likely coalition partners to create a €500 billion fund and relax Germany's rules on government debt. The Kremlin said Russia and Ukraine would exchange 175 prisoners of war each on Wednesday, and Russia would also hand over to Ukraine 23 badly wounded soldiers. US envoy Steve Witkoff said on Tuesday that more talks with Russia on the Ukraine war would take place on Sunday in Jeddah. Looking at reports from around the world today, Richard, it seems that the only person who feels that steps to ceasefire have been achieved is Donald Trump. Other places were very negative and said that Putin had simply rejected the ceasefire. Is that your take on it also?
Well, there's been comments attributed to Vladimir Zelensky that his hour-long discussion with Trump, well, they were frank, certainly, but I'm paraphrasing. He thought that they were making progress and they were productive. They may not be the exact words or form of words that he's used, but that's what I recall seeing. Now, I suppose there's an element of this means that he has to say that, but I think that if some progress is being made towards a ceasefire in terms of energy infrastructure, that's got to be something. But of course, that could simply open up, Putin simply, redirects his forces towards other forms of key infrastructure as well. The key thing is to get the ceasefire and as quickly as possible. And then at that point, you can start negotiations. One glimmer that I did find is that the US has apparently agreed to help Ukraine source further air defence protection measures from Europe. So if the Americans are beginning to give the Ukrainians material, as they call it, and help supply them with further defence systems, then that at least is a less catastrophic situation than they were plunged into 2-3 weeks ago now with that abominable display that we saw in the Oval Office at the White House. But certainly there seem to be some optimistic noises coming from President Zelensky. I hope that's justified and not simply him going through the motions that he may sadly be required to go through at present.
Well, let's hope so, and let's hope also that Putin saying that he will stop attacking energy infrastructure doesn't mean that he'll just do the same as last night and attack hospitals. But we shall see over the coming days. Turning to the UK now, and Labour's recent proposal to overhaul disability benefits, potentially affecting up to 1.2 million people, has sparked significant backlash within the party and across campaign groups, with some Labour members resigning over the plans. Work and Pension Secretary Liz Kendall unveiled measures aimed at reducing disability payments by £5 billion, intending to boost employment and cut spending. The key element of overhaul is the introduction of stricter eligibility criteria for personal independence payments, PIP, which could see many disabled individuals losing vital financial support. Experts warn that these changes could exacerbate the country's mental health crisis, push more children into poverty, and disproportionately affect those with lower levels of disability. Among the most significant changes are tighter rules for claiming PIP, which could exclude individuals who need assistance with everyday tasks such as cooking or personal hygiene, unless they have other qualifying needs. These revisions are expected to result in a loss of support for between 800,000 and 2 million people, facing a reduction of 4,200 to 6,300 annually by 2029 to 30. The announcement has led to growing dissent within Labour, with as many as 30 MPs expected to vote against the measures. Former Labour MSP Neil Findlay resigned from the party, criticising the proposed cuts as harmful to vulnerable groups. SNP MSP Gordon MacDonald expressed concern that the plan would undermine efforts to tackle child poverty in Scotland and called on Anna Sarwar, leader of Scottish Labour, to clarify his stance on the cuts. Labour MP Richard Bergen also voiced opposition, highlighting the impact of the new PIP rules, which he argued would leave disabled individuals without crucial support. The controversy underscores divisions within the party, as MPs push back against what they describe as a cruel proposal. In response, the SNP has reiterated its commitment to protecting the most vulnerable in society, distancing itself from Labour's welfare changes. Well, of course, the SNP say that, but it's not as if they have ultimate power in this. Any spending in England will have an effect on the Barnett consequentials and the money which is available in Scotland. But looking at the resignation of Richard Finlay there, Labour Party were trying to dismiss it as, well, he was yesterday's man, he's a private individual, he can say what he thinks. There's been no really strong reaction from Labour MPs or MSPs. Do you think we're going to see that?
No, frankly. And one person that you will certainly not see any kind of strong reaction from is Anna Sarwar, who seems to be doing his usual thing of sticking his head below the parapet, keeping quiet, hoping it all blows over, and maybe in a couple of days' time, when he's finally confronted, he'll utter a few platitudes, expressing, speaking out both sides of his mouth, uttering platitudes about how concerned he is, but at the same time recognising the need to do something, and his words summing up to very, very little indeed, because that's straight out of the Sarwar playbook, and it's what we've seen with things like the keeping the bedroom tax, it's what we've seen with things like keeping the rape clause. And this set of reforms, look, I can have a certain amount of sympathy with any chancellor who wants to help people who are currently in the welfare system, but I cannot understand the logic of what Liz Kendall is trying to do on behalf of the Chancellor. The measures that have been announced that they're now consulting on are intended to save about £5 billion, which, in the context of annual government expenditure of nearly £1 trillion, really doesn't amount to a great deal in comparison to the incredible amount of distress that any reform of the welfare system, poorly communicated, can cause. And I was utterly shocked last night to see one of my former colleagues, Kirsty Blackman, the excellent SNP MP for Aberdeen North, saying that the UK government's consultation document on this hasn't even been produced in accessible formats, which means, of course, that many of those who are most likely to be affected by any changes are also least likely to be able to get read and understand what the government is proposing, because they're not providing it in the various accessible formats that you would normally expect any reasonable government to be producing it in. And that's to fail on such a basic point of accessibility when you're talking about the benefit, the very benefit that allows people to access society through personal independence payments is really quite extraordinary. You're quite right, Douglas, that this will have an effect, although some benefits are now devolved in Scotland. The amount of resource that is available for them depends very much on spending decisions taken in England for England by the UK government. And already the Scottish government is filling the gap quite considerably in terms of a more generous welfare offering. So it remains to be seen quite what impact this will have on the overall amount of resource there is available in Scotland to have a suitable welfare system. But it's looking like it's going to create problems there. But of course, we'll have to the Scottish government will have to properly study exactly what's being proposed, and then the numbers will have to be worked through. Now, there are some things in this that I did think sounded reasonable. Getting rid of the assessments that have been such a blight in the UK welfare system for so long, getting rid of some of those unnecessary assessments, as we've done with the social security system in Scotland, I think is long overdue. We can at least, or I can at least welcome that. The right to try to help people try putting a foot into the workplace without putting their benefits at risk. I'm not sure that's the way to do it, but I think the principle behind that is right. But fundamentally, if you want to help people to get back into work who are able to get back to work and who have the confidence and the skills to get back into work, then we need to be taking away those cliff edges entirely that exist between the benefit system and wages when they're coming in. And although universal credit helped with that to some extent, we've got to remember that many of the people who are claiming universal credit and PIP are actually already in work. So I dislike the rhetoric that there is around this. As Neil Findlay, the former late Scottish Labour MSP, said, it's making out that people are scroungers, that they're doing this because it's the easy option. It's unleashed a tirade of ill-informed, hateful abuse about those who receive benefits through the benefit system. The idea that if you've got a Motability card that you're not paying for it, for example. So it really is unleashing the worst, and it's pandering to the very worst prejudice that there's too many people on welfare who are at it, for want of a better expression. The fact is, it's there as a safety net. That's how we should be describing it. We should be constructing that safety net to better interact with the world of work, to help people who can work sporadically, or to help people who can work with support. But taking away from a lot of people the elements of of PIP, which is what enables them to get up and present to the world and play as full a role as they can in society, I think is absolutely the wrong way to be looking at this. And while I can understand the desire to create a bit more fiscal headroom for the Chancellor, this is surely not the way to go about it, either in strict policy terms, and certainly not in terms of the way it's been briefed out and communicated, because there are millions of people who will be very, very worried at this point in time about what this could actually mean for them in practice.
I'm sure they will be. Thank you for a very comprehensive answer. Looking at specifically Scottish politics now, and with just over a year until the next Holyrood election, a new Survation poll reveals that the SNP remains Scotland's largest political party, holding an 11-point lead over Labour. The poll, commissioned by Quantum Communications, shows Reform UK has ahead of the Scottish Conservatives, claiming third place in Holyrood constituency voting intentions. Reform UK now stands at 17%, 5 points higher than the Conservatives, and 16% on the regional list, ahead by 3%. The party's rise appears to be largely at the expense of the Scottish Conservatives, with nearly 40% of their 2021 voters now supporting Reform UK. However, Reform UK's broad appeal across the political spectrum may further fragment the unionist vote, limiting Labour's attempts to narrow the gap with the SNP. Despite this surge, the wider political landscape remains stable, with the SNP still holding a commanding position in Scottish politics. Labour is projected to achieve its worst result in the history of devolution, with only 19 seats, a mere 5 ahead of Reform UK. While some Scottish Labour MSPs and MPs have criticised the party's stance on cuts to disability benefits, pressure is mounting on leader Anna Sarwar, who has backed UK government cuts. Stuart McMillan MSP highlighted that the SNP under John Swinney's leadership remains focused on key issues such as improving healthcare services, reducing waiting times, and making GP access easier for the people of Scotland. He noted that the SNP is committed to listening to the people and continuing its efforts to earn their support, especially as Labour struggles with internal divisions and voter discontent. Well, the drift away from Conservatives to Reforms mirrors what's happening in England and Wales, but the suggestion that some of their support is coming from Labour seems a bit bizarre, given that most of the complaints about Labour is that they've moved to the right. So if you want them to be more left, why on earth support a far-right party? Or is it simply a case of they're an unknown quantity? Nobody really knows what they propose for Scotland and the Scottish Parliament. Is this a signal of a protest vote?
Possibly. I think there's something in that, but there's always been a pretty socially conservative element to the Labour vote. And, Reform haven't just been doing okay in parts of Scotland where the Tories have done well, but the Reform have also been polling pretty well in local government by-elections in West Central Scotland as well. So, there's an element of a hardcore unionist vote in parts of Scotland. It was with Labour. It had been with Labour for years. It transferred to the Tories under Ruth Davidson in Scotland. I think to a large extent it transferred back to Labour at the last UK general election because Labour were the party most likely to stuff the SNP, as a lot of those folks would have seen that as being a very desirable objective. And now I think that while the SNP has lost support to Labour, clearly Labour has hemorrhaged a fair chunk of it, that hardcore unionist support to Reform. And it's a dilemma for Anas Sarwar how they can get it back, because they're not going to get it by tacking ever further to the right. The Tories are losing support because they're, in some ways, that's the pro-Brexit vote that they pandered to, and they lost out. I mean, when we go back to the European elections that we didn't expect a few years ago because Brexit hadn't been done, the Tories under Ruth Davidson crashed to the lowest level of support since the Reform Act of 1832 because they were getting turned over by the Faragists. And it looks like the same thing is happening, that no matter how nasty and how much of a boot boy Russell Finlay tries to appear, he can't out boot boy Nigel Farage, and the Tory vote is slumping as a result. I think there's maybe another element of the Reform vote that they have at the moment that needs to be unpacked a bit. And I've no polling evidence for this, but I have a gut feeling that there's always been about 15 to 20% of the Scottish electorate has never really reconciled itself to any kind of home rule at all. And for Westminster, some of them turned out. For Holyrood, they tended to stay at home, and they didn't like the Tories particularly because they were seen as, trying to make devolution work. But they might turn out and vote for the UK Tories at UK general election time. I strongly suspect that out of that unionist latent vote, Reform have managed to give them something that they think is worth voting for, because they pander to the prejudices that are kind of instinctual to a large part of that of that bloc. So, I think we've had a tendency in Scotland to see, we're all very progressive and we're all marching in the same direction. There's a significant body of opinion in Scotland has never signed up for that, and they're finding their tribe, if you like, in the Faragists, who are certainly getting more than a fair wind in the UK media at the moment, despite the fact they've only got about 4 MPs now after defections. But this is what happens when you've got a British narrative-dominated media in Scotland, and you've got producers of the likes of Question Time that seem to, have a reserve plaque on a seat round the table for Farage that Fiona Bruce gives a wee buff up, before he comes on. So the BBC have, been puffing as much hot air into this shyster as they can for years, because they think it gives balance and they think it gives balance, but they've inflated that. And in Scotland we're not immune from that, given the number of newspapers whose content originates from south of the border, and certainly given the way that much of our news content on the broadcast media does as well. So I think there's a subset in Scottish politics are coming out to vote for something that they didn't feel they had the ability to vote for before. And certainly that hardcore unionist vote that Labour had always been able to take for granted for a long time, despite that flirtation with the Tories, now a large part of that seems to be going over to Reform. Challenge for the SNP, sitting at 34%. It's given a big significant portion of the MSPs as a result of that, but the SNP is still some distance adrift of where it was at the last election and the election before that. So the SNP has still got a great deal of work to do to re-engage with the voters that supported the party in the past. Worryingly, in terms of the support for the Faragists, they seem to be doing quite well amongst younger people. And if that's the sort of message that is resonating with young people who, with some good reason, are disaffected from politics and the politics that we see out of Westminster, we've got a problem in our hands, and we need to be doing more to engage and make sure that we're doing more for young people who have traditionally felt themselves kind of adrift from politics because if they're seeking solace in what an absolute shyster like Farage is offering, then we've got a serious problem in our hands.
Interesting, thank you. Staying with Scotland, and plans to secure a long-term industrial future for Grangemouth have been boosted by Project Willow, a feasibility study outlining 9 options for the site's future. The project is backed by £25 million from the Scottish Government and £200 million from the UK Government, with First Minister John Swinney visiting Grangemouth today to help in driving the initiative forward. The £1.5 million feasibility study published by EY follows Petro Ineos's decision to decommission its oil refinery at Grangemouth. The study identifies potential avenues for Grangemouth to transition into low-carbon energy production, taking advantage of its skilled workforce and industrial heritage. 9 proposals have been put forward, including plastics recycling, hydrogen production, and biofeedstock projects, with the potential to create up to 800 jobs by 2040. The Scottish Government's £25 million Grangemouth Just Transition Fund and the UK Government's £200 million investment will help bring these ideas to life over the next year. The Scottish Government says the £87 million it has already invested underlines its commitment to securing a new industrial future for Grangemouth. By focusing on green energy, Grangemouth aims to attract investment while preserving its rich industrial history. The proposals outlined in the report include projects in waste management, biofeedstock production, and offshore wind energy, all intended to support Scotland's net zero goals. The Grangemouth Future Industry Board, co-chaired by UK Government Energy Minister Michael Shanks and the Scottish Government's Acting Cabinet Secretary for Net Zero and Energy, Gillian Martin, has begun working with local industry leaders to market these opportunities. Both governments have pledged to review the study's recommendations to determine how best to deploy funding to support private sector investments. Additionally, the £100 million Falkirk and Grangemouth growth deal will invest in local energy projects, providing tailored skills support for refinery workers to help transition into new roles. These efforts are aimed at securing Grangemouth's future as a hub for low-carbon energy and regional economic growth. Well, on many levels, a good news story for Grangemouth there, but one thing which struck me, Richard, was God, it takes an awful long time. They were talking about producing sustainable aviation fuel, and that would happen by 2035. Whereas, the people who are worried about losing their jobs now, that seems like a very long way away. So, is it good news, or is it simply just the best news we could expect?
I'm not sure it's news that Grangemouth has great potential, but both governments have been hanging a lot on the outcome of this report by EY. Now, the bottom line is that the refinery is gone. It's not. We're not going to have one, and that's a loss of 400 jobs by the summer. Now, the fact that there's potentially 800 jobs can be achieved through, investment in hydrogen, plastic recycling, biofeedstocks, as you said, like we know, that's great, but those 800 jobs ain't going to be there by the summer. And you've also spoken about the very long lead-in time there is for that's been mentioned potentially for producing sustainable aviation fuel. So these are all things that are worth pursuing, but I think now is the time to start deciding what bits of the state funding from the Just Transition funding and from any UK government funding that's there will be deployed where and how in order to pump prime that. And now, speaking from a little bit of experience of city region deals, I was one of the signatories to the Aberdeen City Region deal when I was the co-leader of Aberdeenshire Council. And it's taken quite a few years, but there's a lot of projects now coming to fruition that are making a big impact in the local economy, or making an impact in the local economy. But these things never, ever happen quickly. So, my advice, my plea would be to move on this as quickly as possible, because certainly there's not going to be a replacement for those 400 jobs by the summer. But these initiatives all look like they're worth chasing after. And I hope that they do. But also, one thing I would say is that there's other folk out there who could potentially be interested in investing in sites in and around Grangemouth, whether in these spheres or not. So I think eyes need to be kept open and ears need to be kept close to the ground to see what further private investment it might be possible to entice, whether with or even potentially without incentives, because that's a big jobs hit to the Grangemouth and Forth Valley area. And while other things will continue to work at to be made at the Grangemouth site, that's a big gap that needs to be filled. And if we're going to have a just transition for workers, we need to be moving on that very quickly. We've got the proof of concept, if you like, with this report and Project Willow, so we need to move forward in that, but it can't be the only game in town, and governments need to be fleet of foot in terms of looking out for and trying to incentivise and encourage other investors in there, because the site itself and the workforce has a great deal of potential.
Thank you. I look now at one of the fallouts of the Horizon IT scandal. Lee Castleton, a key victim of the Horizon IT scandal, has launched legal action against the Post Office and Fujitsu over a civil judgment that bankrupted him, despite the flawed IT system being at fault. Castleton, who ran a post office in Bridlington, East Yorkshire, bought in 2003, was accused of a £25,000 shortfall in his accounts within a year. Despite his repeated calls to the post office helpline, he suspected the Horizon IT system was to blame. Unable to afford legal representation, he was forced to represent himself in court, where he was ordered to repay the sum and cover additional costs of £321,000. Leading to bankruptcy. In his legal action, Castleton is seeking to overturn the civil judgment against him, claiming it was obtained fraudulently. His case remains one of the most high-profile in the Horizon IT scandal, described as one of the most significant miscarriages of justice in UK history. While other victims have had criminal convictions overturned, Castleton's civil judgment still stands. In 2023, the public inquiry revealed that the Post Office was aware that Castleton would likely be bankrupted by the legal case, but pursued it to send a message about defending the Horizon system. Following the case, Castleton lost his post office, home, and suffered personal losses, including family stress and hardship. Castleton's solicitors have now filed proceedings in the High Court. Although he has not applied for the government's compensation scheme, he has received an interim payment. The UK government has set aside £1.8 billion for compensation, with over £663 million paid to claimants as of January. As yet, there has been no reported comment from the Post Office or Fujitsu on this matter. Well, obviously we can't talk about this specific case, but I'm interested in your views on the process and how it's been handled, Richard. And one thing which surprised me, so looking back on past news, and just a week ago, Fujitsu agreed to only talks, on possibly contributing to the compensation fund for the victims of this, which seemed just outrageous to me that has not happened before.
Yeah, I mean, the post office scandal was in part of my business portfolio when I was a front bench spokesperson for the SNP at Westminster, but it was my colleague Marion Fellows who led superbly on that, who'd taken an interest in it before it really the issue shot to prominence. But I remember us both thinking that the UK government was letting Fujitsu off the hook almost at the time, in terms of not getting them firmly on the hook for how much they would be contributing to the compensation scheme. And I vaguely remember the minister at the time, Kevin Hollandrake, Conservative business minister, saying that they needed to do these things properly, judiciously. They needed to, they didn't want to let Fujitsu off, and they considered that this was the best way to do it. But the fact that we're this far on, we know roughly what the liabilities are, and frankly, we should be nailing an open-ended liability on Fujitsu for this. Now, I appreciate that it's not wise to talk about court cases which are ongoing, but let me just say that there's a suggestion, an accusation that Fujitsu withheld information from Mr. Castleton's trial, and had that error log been presented, then it would have been clear about the errors that were inherent to the Horizon system. Now, I'm saying that because I've seen it reported on reputable news organisations. I don't know whether or not that's the case, but if it is the case that material information was withheld, then it would seem that not only was Mr. Castleton treated very unfairly, but it would seem that there is it would seem that there's a very serious miscarriage of justice took place at that trial, for which it would be reasonable to try and hold Fujitsu corporately, but also potentially individuals working for Fujitsu at the time, wholly accountable. So, I wish Mr. Castleton every strength with his legal action, because it's not just the financial hardship that he suffered, it's the damage to his reputation, it's the damage to his family life, it's the impact to his health. And that's what we forget all too often about this, that, getting the money back is only a small part of it. People have lost years of their lives to this because of the stress, the loss of reputation, the stresses and strains it's put on family life. And frankly, in a lot of cases, there's no sum of money will ever can ever put that back to what it was. All we can make sure is that there's a sufficient deterrent effect, and that people can get as much as they need to get on with the rest of their lives in recognition of that. And certainly I'll be watching Mr. Castleton's case develop with interest, because it seems to be from what has been reported, it's a quite egregious example and amongst many egregious examples of people being very poorly treated by their employers.
Yes, I'll await the outcome with interest. The United States now and Donald Trump's ongoing attacks on the judiciary have raised concerns about a potential constitutional crisis in the United States, according to former conservative federal judge J. Michael Luttig. Luttig, a respected legal figure, warned that Trump's defiance of court orders, including those concerning deportations, could lead to a constitutional crisis. His remarks followed Trump's call for the impeachment of James Boasberg, a US district judge who issued a restraining order halting deportations under the Alien Enemies Act. The president's actions have been viewed by some as a direct challenge to the rule of law and the integrity of the judicial system, with Luttig suggesting that no president has ever so openly defied a federal court order. Trump's calls for the impeachment of judges, including Boasberg, have sparked controversy, with his supporters echoing his criticism, while others, including Supreme Court Chief Justice John Roberts, have rebuked the notion of impeachment as a response to judicial decisions. Despite Trump's claims that he would not defy the courts, deportation flights continued, apparently ignoring Boasberg's intervention. Luttig, a former ally of conservative figures like Senator Ted Cruz, has become a vocal critic of Trump, particularly after giving testimony to the January the 6th committee. He stressed that if Trump continues to disregard court orders, it could lead to an unprecedented situation in American history. This mounting tension between the executive and judicial branches has led to fears that Trump's behavior could undermine the foundations of the US Constitution, with judges remaining resolute in their commitment to upholding the law. As Trump intensifies his attacks on the judiciary, the nation's legal system faces an uncertain future, with the potential for further clashes over the rule of law. Well, perhaps the first response to that would be, well, really? Might face a constitutional issue in future? Are they not facing a constitutional issue already? And the fact that Trump was handed so much power after the January 6th investigations is the cause for that. And is it not going to be really difficult to put the genie back in the bottle?
Yeah, and I think you've got a president who fears no consequences and will, cry havoc and unleash the dogs of war on anyone who is, and his supporters will, on anyone who they think is standing in the way of doing what they wish to do. It was a quite extraordinary rebuke from the Chief Justice in the Supreme Court, and I think what we do have to remember is that the American system is supposed to be a system of checks and balances, and while some parts are facing extraordinary, if not intolerable, pressure at the moment from the Trump administration, the bar for removing a Supreme Court justice is extraordinarily high, and you're needing a two-thirds majority in the Senate in order to do that. And I think that that's not something that Trump is going to be able to get under any circumstances whatsoever. So you expect the judicial arm to remain firm, to remain true to their oath of office, to respect their place in the Constitution, to stand up against an overmighty, overreaching executive. Certainly, they seem to be one of the few restraints that can still be exacted on the mandate that Trump has, not because he doesn't have a mandate to do things, however much some of us might dislike what he's trying to do, but certainly the Constitution has these, guardrails and limits on what any president can do, and it's incumbent on the justices to uphold the law, because if they don't, with this president careering around, it's hard to see who will. They are the ones who need to be remembering their oath, remembering their commitment, their oath to that Constitution, and making sure that above all else, the rule of law is upheld, whatever else transpires in this presidency.
Thank you. And let me just remind viewers that if you have any comments to make about the stories we cover in Scotland at 7 or about the station generally, please use Blue Sky to message us. If you use the tag Scotland at 7, we can broadcast these live as the programme goes out. And don't point out that actually there was another president, Andrew Jackson, who defied a Supreme Court ruling. It was a long time ago, before the Constitution was fully baked. Turkey now, and Turkish police detained Ekrem İmamoğlu, the mayor of Istanbul and a leading opposition figure, in a series of raids on Wednesday. The arrests also targeted over 100 others, including politicians and municipal officials who are accused of corruption and links to terrorist organizations. İmamoğlu, a prominent figure in Turkey's opposition, was arrested alongside several individuals, including key aides and municipal officials. The charges against him include corruption, fraud, and allegedly aiding the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, a group labelled a terrorist organisation by Turkey. The Turkish authorities also accused İmamoğlu of leading a criminal organisation involved in extortion and embezzlement. This arrest is seen as part of a broader crackdown on political opponents. İmamoğlu, who had been considered a serious contender in Turkey's upcoming presidential election, had previously faced legal challenges, including a political ban stemming from a 2022 conviction for insulting election officials. He had also been expected to secure the opposition party's nomination for the 2028 presidential race. The arrest sparked widespread protests, particularly from students, and was met with accusations of anti-democratic use of judicial power. The Turkish government dismissed claims of political motivation, asserting that the judiciary was acting independently. Meanwhile, opposition leaders described the arrest as an attempt to stifle democratic choice and prevent free elections. In addition to the arrests, a series of internet restrictions, including limited access to social media platforms, were imposed across Turkey, prompting concerns about the suppression of public dissent. The developments have raised alarm over the state of democracy and the rule of law in Turkey, particularly with the country heading towards its next presidential election. Also, not just in the United States is the independence of the judiciary under threat. Perhaps we don't know the full details of this, but we could say that Erdogan certainly has form in this area. What's your take on it, Richard?
Yes, I mean, he obviously came quite close to being toppled, I think, back in 2013. And, it's not in the least bit surprising that he appears to be going after political opponents again on trumped up charges. My understanding, unless the constitution changes, he can't stand again for president. There's maybe a device about calling an early election that might get him a few more years. But Istanbul seems to be the heartland of the political opposition to Erdogan, and that is where the crucible of any opposition to him will come from. So it's perhaps no surprise that it's the mayor of that city who has risen to prominence and who is bearing the brunt of this activity to try and delegitimise him and prevent him from contesting the elections. It's a script that we've seen far too often in the last 20 years under Erdogan, sadly. But like every ruler who would be a strongman ruler, he can't last forever, he won't be around forever, and eventually something has to give, whether it's at the ballot box or through pressures releasing themselves elsewhere. So I think it may not quite be the end for him yet, but it certainly looks like a part of the beginning of the end, because this is not the act of a leader that is confident or in any way strong in terms of the affections in which he's held with the people that he rules over.
Quite, thank you. Back to Scotland now, and carers in full or part-time education in Scotland could receive over £4,900 annually in financial support from Social Security Scotland, helping ease the burden of unpaid care responsibilities. New research from the Carers Trust Scotland estimates that more than 30,000 students in Scotland juggle their education with unpaid care for family members, friends or neighbours. These student carers are 4 times more likely to drop out due to financial difficulties. The introduction of carer support payment and carers allowance supplement aims to provide vital financial support, offering up to £4,900 per year for eligible carers. Carer support payment, replacing carers allowance in Scotland, is available to many student carers in full-time education, a benefit not extended under the UK system. The carers allowance supplement, which is unique to Scotland, is paid twice a year to those receiving carer support payment or carers allowance. Additionally, students aged 16 to 18 who are not eligible for carer support payment may qualify for the Young Carer Grant. This grant provides a yearly payment of £383.75, rising to £390.25 from April 2025. Carer support payment provides £81.90 per week, increasing to £83.30 from April 2025 to carers who offer 35 or more hours of care each week. Carers must earn £151 or less per week after tax and expenses. The payment is available to part-time and full-time students, including those aged 16 to 19, with certain conditions. The financial support aims to ease the challenges student carers face, helping them continue their education while providing essential care. The £4,900 estimate is based on the full yearly entitlement for carer support payment and carers allowance supplement at the 2025-26 rates, effective from 1st of April 2025. So a good news story there, that something being done in Scotland that's not being done in the rest of the UK, and really from the arithmetic just obvious, isn't it? One, it's a boost for these students who often lose hope in their situation, but also so much cheaper than contracting agencies to provide care in the home.
Oh yeah, I mean, kinship care is a really important part of our society in Scotland, and frankly, I don't know how many families would manage if that commitment wasn't there, and how frankly how the state would go and fill the gap if suddenly that had to be done. But I think particularly when it comes to young carers, we often overlook the impact that this has on them. You can have carers who are young enough to be still at school, for parents or relatives, and we really don't do enough, I think, to support them. So this is something that will, I'm sure, make a really, really big difference, because these young people who are carers are, there's a very good chance they're economically marginalised. More so if the welfare reforms we were talking about at the top of the show come through. There's a likelihood, because of the amount of time commitment that they have to spend and levels of exhaustion, that they'll be socially excluded. And again, their educational attainment is on average likely to be lesser than those of their peers who don't have that carer's responsibility. So I think it's incumbent upon us to do more to help these quite remarkable young people who show such compassion and commitment to their loved ones and to others. So helping them to overcome that opportunity gap by supporting them with this grant to help them get into full and part-time education, I think it's an enormous step in the right direction. But I think it's more importantly than just making it available. People have to know it's available. We have to signpost it to those who could benefit and really help them fully grasp the opportunity that is here, because we all know that caring responsibilities for one reason or another don't always won't last forever, and there has to be a life beyond caring, during caring, and after caring as well, or when somebody's care needs, the person being cared for, their care needs change. So doing all we can to help young carers grasp the opportunities that education can give them, and giving them the financial support to allow them to fully participate in that, I think is a great way of potentially reducing the opportunity gap, of helping people to move forward in life as they would hope to meet their own dreams and aspirations. And but I think the key thing, as well as making it available, is ensuring that those who can benefit from it most do actually embrace it and get that benefit, because if they benefit, we all do.
Thank you. Yes, and let's hope it does give some young carers hope for the future. Well, that's it for this evening's Scotland at 7. Thank you very much to my guest tonight, Richard Thomson. Before I go, I just want to remind you that at Broadcasting Scotland, we depend on the generosity of our supporters. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment, thank you very much. We were £16,000 short of our funding requirements in 2024, which has left us short of the money we need to pay our bills. We face costs of over £4,000 every month, but only receive donations of around £2,500. We have raised over £7,000 this year so far, but we still urgently need to raise at least £5,000 to pay our bills now. Our programmes will always be free to view. However, if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, and please donate whatever you can afford. Thank you again to our guest tonight, Richard Thomson, for his insight, and thank you to you at home or wherever you are for watching, either live or on catch-up. Please join us on Broadcasting Scotland again tomorrow. But for now, goodbye, good night, and thank you for watching.